A political first, how Hillary Clinton's milestone affects today's presidential primaries. Indefensible comments, House Speaker Paul Ryan calls Donald Trump's remarks about a judge the textbook definition of racism. Clarifying changes to canon law, Pope Francis addressing the clergy sex abuse crisis with specific language about removing bishops. And regular visitor, India's Prime Minister returns to Washington for the 7th time in 2 years. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, June 7th, 2016. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. We have two major political stories topping tonight's news. Hillary Clinton makes history as the first woman to secure a major political party nomination. And House Speaker Paul Ryan calls Donald Trump's controversial comments textbook racism. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn begins team coverage.
Brian, Hillary Clinton clinches the nomination and becomes the first woman in our 240-year history to take the reins of a major political party's nomination. Yet, the White House says, out of respect to voters in today's primary election, no endorsement is coming.
We are on the brink of a historic, unprecedented moment. But we still have work to do, don't we?
Hillary Clinton wins, but plays it low-key, as does the administration.
However, at this point, there is at least one superdelegate, the one who works in the Oval Office, who's not prepared to make a public declaration about his endorsement at this point.
And Bernie Sanders says she's not the nominee, quibbling with the way Democrats count superdelegates. He wants them counted at the party's convention in late July, and he's been hoping for a contested convention. The president spoke with Sanders this weekend, and there have been leaks that the president will endorse Clinton, just not yet. With the exception of Washington, D.C., today marks the last day of primary voting, and 5 states are doing so. The largest state is California. The polls have shown a tight race. Others are Montana, New Jersey, New Mexico, North Dakota, and South Dakota. And for Republicans here in Washington, Speaker of the House Paul Ryan is rebuking the presidential nominee on the Republican side, Donald Trump, saying his comments about a federal judge of Mexican heritage are racist. Jason Calvi spent the morning in Southeast Washington with the Speaker, who was announcing his new poverty initiative. Jason?
Lauren, Speaker Ryan joins a growing Republican chorus slamming Donald Trump. It all began when Donald Trump said the judge hearing the Trump University case could not be fair because of his Mexican heritage. This is sidetracking from Speaker Ryan's plans and goals to unify the Republican Party with a conservative agenda.
We try to give them long-term support.
It was supposed to be the grand unveiling, a proposal to overhaul the war on poverty.
Looking at new and innovative ways, better ways to help get people out of poverty and reach their God-given potential.
Speaker Ryan and House Republicans came to the House of Help, City of Hope, an addiction treatment center in Washington, run by a Protestant minister.
The lesson is get out of their way, support them, back them up. Because they know what they're doing. They know how to get people out of poverty. There's a very important role for government to play here. But that's got to be bottom up, not top down.
So the proposal promotes working with charities. It says marriage is a key to lower poverty rates, and it celebrates school voucher programs. It would also increase work requirements for people receiving welfare.
We're going to expect work from those who receive government benefits, because nowhere do you learn skills sooner, nowhere do you escape poverty faster than with a full-time job.
But Trump trumps the policy unveiling, as reporters ask Speaker Ryan to weigh in on Donald Trump's comments about Judge Curiel.
Claiming a person can't do the job because of their race is sort of like the textbook definition of a racist comment. I think that should be absolutely disavowed. It's absolutely unacceptable. But do I believe that Hillary Clinton is the answer? No, I do not.
Ryan adds a Trump presidency is better than a Clinton one, and Trump could help put the anti-poverty agenda into law.
Tonight, Donald Trump firing back, saying his words have been misconstrued as an attack on all people of Mexican heritage. He says this is all about this particular judge, who he says has been unfair in this case. Lauren?
Joining us now is Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Well, big news today with Hillary Clinton, but we just heard a piece about Paul Ryan and how he is now saying that Donald Trump's comments are racist. What does Donald Trump have to do next?
I think Donald Trump has to think about walking his comments back. Some have called for him to apologize for his remarks about the judge, including John Cusack, who ran in the Republican primary. But I think he has to backtrack, and up to now he's basically doubled down. He doesn't have much cover at all from other Republicans. Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, also criticizing Trump. This is a bad time for Trump not to have the party behind him. He was actually making progress along these lines, and then this happened.
So is he going to do it? It is not in his nature, and does it really matter?
I think this is a controversy that's not going to go away because he needs the Latino vote. And overall, his numbers right now among Latinos are not good. So I do think this is different than his past controversies. That's why I think maybe he doesn't have to apologize, but he has to backtrack a little bit. But he hasn't shown much humility, we've seen, and he's not known to apologize really for anything.
Tell me why Hillary Clinton hasn't been able to say, ta-da, I'm the Democratic nominee.
Well, she took it all the way to the hilt in 2008 against Barack Obama. So she can't say Bernie Sanders has to get out until everyone has voted. So I think until after Washington, D.C. votes next week, then you're going to start to hear those calls that Bernie Sanders should bow out. Because now everybody has voted. But because in 2008, she waited, some said, a little bit too long to bow out. She can't push Bernie out, not yet.
What's the next step for Bernie Sanders?
Well, he's going to have to decide what he's going to do after the District of Columbia votes. After all the votes are in, does he continue on? And he wants to strike a deal. He wants changes to the Democratic platform. So at one point, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are going to have to get in the room and they're going to have to strike a deal. And I think they probably will. And the Democratic Party will finally be united.
Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Some other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. President Obama hosts India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House. They discuss the International Climate Change Agreement, nuclear security, also terrorism. Modi says both nations continue working shoulder to shoulder. The U.S. and India are the two largest democracies in the world.
I know that whenever he visits, it is a source of great pride and excitement, not only for the people of India, but the remarkable Indian American community here in the United States.
This is Modi's fourth visit to the U.S. since taking office 2 years ago and his seventh meeting with President Obama. Tomorrow, he will address a joint meeting of Congress. Sadanand Dhume is a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, a South Asia columnist for the Wall Street Journal. So why do you say Prime Minister Modi's address to Congress marks a remarkable personal makeover?
You see, until a few years ago, Prime Minister Narendra Modi was not allowed to visit the United States. There had been violence between Hindus and Muslims on his watch when he was Chief Minister of Gujarat State in Western India in 2002, and concerns about his inability to stem that violence had led to the U.S. revoking his visa. So what we've seen in the last 2 years is a remarkable rapprochement between Modi and the United States, and I think both countries deserve credit for it. The U.S. for recognizing that the courts had found that there was no evidence of holding him culpable, and recognizing that India is an important country for the U.S., and Modi for deciding to let bygones be bygones and focus on the positive aspects of the relationship and how the two countries can work together for common objectives.
He's visited often in the past couple of years. What do you expect he'll say to Congress?
I think he's going to do a couple of things. I think the first is that he is going to underscore the commonalities between the U.S. and India. These are both democracies. These are both pluralistic societies. Both of them are rooted in English tradition of common law. So I think he'll emphasize the fact that the U.S. and India have a lot in common. The second thing he's going to try and do is talk up his stewardship of the economy and talk about how India is open for business and he would like to see more U.S. business involved in India and more U.S. investment in India.
Having visited with President Obama a number of times now, do you think these two are getting close personally, sort of working together on these projects?
Well, I'm always a little bit skeptical of that. I mean, I see all these stories and, about how they're like, best buddies or whatever. And I guess I just sort of, I view these things in a somewhat different way. I think what is driving the two countries together are shared interests. They both have concerns about China. They both have concerns about the rise of radical Islam. And this is how democracies work. I mean, the leaders of democratic countries are there to represent their countries. And if that means, forging a good relationship with each other, that's part of their job description, in my view.
Great perspective. Sadanand Dhume, American Enterprise Institute, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And Turkey responds to another attack in Istanbul. Investigators say a car bomb struck a police vehicle, killing about a dozen people and injuring 3 dozen more. It is the 4th bombing to hit the Turkish city this year. The country has seen an increase in violence linked to Kurdish rebels and ISIS militants. So far, no one has claimed responsibility for this most recent attack. It's also not clear who set off today's car bomb in Karbala, Iraq. That's about 55 miles south of Baghdad. Attacks like this are rare in that predominantly Shiite city. That bombing killed at least 7 people and injured nearly 2 dozen. There was also a series of deadly bombings in Baghdad. Folks in Florida recover from Tropical Storm Colin. It toppled trees and dumped 9 inches of rain in parts of the Sunshine State. Governor Rick Scott declared a state of emergency. 6,000 National Guard troops were ready to deploy to the hardest hit areas.
I haven't seen it like this in 10 years. It's pretty high. And this isn't even a hurricane.
Georgia and the Carolinas also got heavy rain before Colin moved out to sea. Coming up, Silent No More. A rape victim speaks out, detailing how the crime has changed her life and clarifying the Pope's plan to hold bishops more accountable for clergy sex abuse. Thanks for joining us this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. A California judge faces growing outrage for sentencing a former Stanford University student to just 6 months in jail for rape. Wyatt Goolsby is following that story from our newsroom tonight. Wyatt?
Brian, already hundreds of thousands of petitioners online are calling for Santa Clara County Judge Aaron Persky to be removed from the bench, saying 6 months just doesn't match the crime. The prosecution was asking for 6 years, and this case is putting the national spotlight on campus rape.
Former star Stanford swimmer 20-year-old Brock Turner is now behind bars, convicted of sexually assaulting an unconscious woman on campus last year.
Stanford has not done a good job. It is fully aware that it has a problem with, particularly with fraternities and with protecting young women from sexual assault and keeping them safe on campus.
Outrage over the sentencing has grown following the release of an emotional 12-page letter the rape victim wrote and read to her attacker in court. She explains what happened after she awoke after drinking an excessive amount of alcohol. The next thing I remember, I was in a gurney in a hallway. I had dried blood and bandages on the backs of my hands and elbow. I thought maybe I had fallen. A deputy explained I had been assaulted. She would later learn 2 graduate students saw Turner raping her behind a dumpster and held Turner until the police could arrive.
She has given a voice to so many victims of sexual assault who have been silenced. So I'm pleased that out of something so awful, this very light sentence, we've created a fire has been ignited, and we've created a new dialogue where victims are being supported.
News of the letter and Turner's sentence has gone viral, with nearly 300,000 signatures calling for the judge to be removed. David Laban, the president of the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, says the sentence does technically follow California law. The judge could have chosen anywhere from 6 months to up to 14 years, but he agrees the sentence was uncommon and too light.
It is, and I think that the trial prosecutor said it very well, that when the court handed down the sentence, it was like a punch in the gut.
The judge in this case noted that Turner had no criminal record and had been considering the potential harm of sending him to jail for so long. Turner will be on probation for 3 years once he gets out of jail and will have to be a registered sex offender for the rest of his life. Brian.
Thank you, Wyatt. And Pope Francis lays out legal procedures to remove bishops if the Vatican determines they were negligent in addressing clergy sex abuse. Some church experts say the new law shows the Holy Father's commitment to this issue.
It is true that just passing a law doesn't really change much, although it is a good sign, and it's a sign that the Pope is committed. He's determined to make sure that these things don't happen again in the church.
Francis acknowledges that canon law already allowed for a bishop to be removed for grave reasons. He says he wants to precisely state that negligence in handling abuse cases counts as one of those reasons. Mary Shovlain, our Rome producer, joining us tonight. Mary, what has changed in this process of removing bishops considered negligent in addressing clergy sex abuse?
Well, basically, bishops have always been able to be removed if the Vatican sees fit, depending on whatever the case was. But Pope Francis, with this legal document that he published on Saturday, is putting it in black and white. He's saying specifically in these cases of negligence, in cases of abuse of minors or adults who are at risk, in these cases, a bishop can be removed for that grave fault that is found if they were just negligent, just based on negligence alone.
Well, what's happened with that proposed tribunal to prosecute bishops who covered up for pedophile priests?
Well, we had heard about a tribunal that was in the thought of Pope Francis to set up a tribunal here in the Vatican that would just worry about bishops and their cases and their role in these abuse cases, if any. That is now, I think, turned into this motu proprio, this legal document that the Pope established. And so instead of a tribunal, you have it in black and white now in the canon law, and you also have a special group of legal experts that the Pope is going to set up in the future of cardinals and bishops, legal experts who will decide case by case on the removal of a bishop. So it won't be the Pope deciding alone on whether a bishop should be removed. It will be him together with this group of experts that will help him.
Mary, is the appointment of a Vatican administrator for the Archdiocese of Againo, Guam, a result of this change? And what is Archbishop Anthony Apuran saying about that situation?
I don't think it's a result specifically of this change that was just happened on Saturday, which will be applied to cases from now going forward. But it's interesting timing for sure. And I think the Archbishop has been very open. He just released a video message today, in fact, to the people back home in Guam saying, I welcome the apostolic administrator. I will continue to be the bishop here as the investigation is ongoing. So it's good that, he's being open and transparent. And of course, we'll have to wait and see how the investigation plays out.
Mary Shovlain, our Rome producer. Thanks for joining us, Mary.
Thank you.
Here in our studio, Dr. Matthew Bunson, theologian, historian, and our new EWTN Senior Contributor. Matthew, how effective is this law going to be?
I think the law can be very effective. What we're seeing now is Francis kind of closing a loophole that had been in existence. We saw, as Mary was documenting, that the Pope is willing to put bishops on trial who are guilty of actually engaging in cover-ups. Now, the Pope is moving forward with the next stage of the reform, and that is actually holding bishops accountable who might be guilty of negligence or incompetence in handling sex abuse cases.
He's been criticized by some for not doing enough in this area.
Yeah.
How does his action compare with that of his predecessors?
Well, Francis is building on his predecessors. That's what's important here. He's standing in perfect continuity with them. We saw that the process began under John Paul II and then gained real steam under Pope Benedict XVI with his reforms. Now Francis is able to look that from the bottom all the way to the top, the Church is protecting minors, and the Church has a legal process in place for dealing with abusers, but also for those who are negligent in handling cases.
So in a nutshell, what does the Church do today to protect minors from this kind of abuse?
Well, if we start with the Vatican, we have the Commission for the Protection of Minors. Across all of the dioceses in the world, across the whole Church, we have a process in place legally for handling cases. That's very important. We now have bishops who are being held accountable. It's for a very good reason that the Church is held up, especially in the United States and in Europe, as the one institution that has done the most to create a safe environment and is really now a role model for other institutions, secular institutions, and how they deal with sex abuse cases.
Do you expect any bishops to be removed under this new law?
I think there's a very good chance of that happening. The key there, though, is that these bishops are not going to be railroaded. There is now, thanks to this motu proprio, thanks to this commission that's being set up, a very clear legal process for handling bishops who are faced with these accusations. So it's an important due process that justice is being done here. But bishops who fail in their duties to protect minors, who fail as shepherds, are being held accountable.
And that process now clarified. Dr. Matthew Bunson, thanks so much for being with us.
Great to be with you.
Up next, more fallout from the Holocaust. Why a Hollywood actress is testifying on Capitol Hill. And people from several faiths work together to restore one of Christianity's holiest sites. You're watching EWTN News Nightly on this Tuesday evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. A federal court orders a halt to a North Carolina State University policy requiring a permit for nearly all speech on campus. This after the university told members of a Christian student group they need a permit to speak with others in the student union. Casey Mattox is a senior counsel for Alliance Defending Freedom. What happened with the Grace Christian Life group there on campus?
Well, free speech is not free when students have to ask permission to speak from their university, but at NC State that's exactly what was happening. The university required every student in every student group to ask advance permission from the university for every conversation they had on campus.
So was this applied across the board, or were there other groups that weren't required to do this?
Well, as you can imagine, NC State could never apply a policy like this to everyone, and they didn't even really try. This was basically applied just to Grace Christian Life to tell them that you can't speak while everyone else was allowed to. But the only permit a student needs to speak on a university campus is the First Amendment.
In fact, evangelizing and Christian outreach really requires this freedom of speech, does it not?
That's exactly right. You know, there are many students on a college campus that will have never heard the gospel, and that's exactly why Grace Christian Life knew that it had to take this stand and not allow the gospel to be gagged.
This seems odd because universities really are to facilitate free speech, open ideas.
That's exactly right. You know, the very purpose of the university is to be a marketplace of ideas. So when a university requires students to ask its permission in order to speak, it violates not just the First Amendment, but the very core purpose of a university's existence.
Do you think then this NC State policy was targeted specifically to keep this group from evangelizing on campus?
Well, it certainly seems, you know, when you have a policy like this that's this broad that can apply to anyone, can apply to any conversation, and then they apply it just to individual students like this, it certainly seems that there was a desire to make sure that these students were not speaking. Whether that was because other students were the ones complaining or the university itself, this was targeted at these particular students.
Casey, is this an isolated case, or do you think this is going on other campuses?
You know, sadly, these kinds of problems happen on university campuses every day. Students who just try to speak and they're not allowed to speak because their universities are not respecting the marketplace of ideas that those universities are supposed to be. NC State may have taken it to a brand new level here, but this is a problem that other Christian and conservative students, particularly on university campuses, experience every day, and we're fighting those cases every day.
From Alliance Defending Freedom, Casey Mattox, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops remains fully committed to World Youth Day, despite security concerns. The State Department recently issued a travel alert for Europe this summer. It encourages pilgrims attending the big event in Krakow, Poland, to be vigilant. The USCCB says individual groups on the local level must decide for themselves whether or not to go to World Youth Day. And an actress who made a movie about an artwork stolen by Nazis now testifies on Capitol Hill about the real-life issue. Helen Mirren supports a bill that would allow families to file civil claims to recover their long-lost property.
It gives Jewish people and other victims of the Nazi terror the opportunity to reclaim their history, their culture, their memories, and most importantly, their families.
Mirren was one of 6 people scheduled to speak at the hearing for the Holocaust Expropriated Art Recovery Act. She starred in The Woman in Gold. That's a film about one woman's quest to recover family possessions seized by the Nazis. Christians in the Holy Land unite to renovate the Church of the Holy Sepulcher. It's built on the site where Jesus died, was buried, and rose from the dead. This historic project is focused on reinforcing and preserving the ancient chamber that houses the tomb of Jesus. These are the first repairs to this area in more than 200 years, and several groups are cooperating in the effort. Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, and Armenian Christians all maintain separate sections of the church. The site remains open to visitors during this renovation project, which could take up to a year to complete. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless you.